All right, welcome back to the Powers on Sports podcast. Appreciate you finding us. We are on to the SEC preview, the conference that just seems to care more than everybody else, allegedly, both in money and in stature. So we're going to talk to Vince Ferrara, great knowledge source of the SEC. Vince is the radio host and digital media content manager for 99.1 Knoxville, Tennessee, the sports animal. He is dialed in to the Tennessee Volunteers, which we're going to get into. He's all over the SEC. He was at media days for all the media days, and he is super dialed in. So welcome back to the podcast, Vince.
Jason, great to be with you. It means more, so they care more. So the life in the SEC.
Before we get to the SEC, high school football start for you this Friday?
This Friday, that's right. You know, my color analyst is former Tennessee running back Jay Graham.
Nice.
Who played in the NFL. So my partner for the last 3 years, who was unbelievable, Don Mahoney, was on Butch Jones's staff, actually had really good offensive lines during Butch Jones's tenure. He took an assistant coaching position here at a high school in the area. So we were looking, and Jay Graham, who left Alabama, he was in coaching, but he wanted to kind of get away from the stresses of coaching on the college level, which is 365 days a year, as you know, and come back to Knoxville. So he's at a Concord Christian school who is restarting their football program. They don't have high school football yet on Fridays, and so he was available for this year. So he and I will team up, and anyone can listen to all those games throughout the season. On our we podcast commercial free all of our play-by-play at 991thesportsanimal.com if anyone wants to check that out. It's really improving high school football in terms of D1 prospects, FBS prospects, even a lot in the FCS level. This is a really good area for high school football. It's not Florida in terms of numbers, we get that, but there's some really good football and great coaches here.
Absolutely. I remember Jay Graham. He had a couple of real good years for the Ravens, and he had probably 5 or 6 year NFL career, if I recall. And he was good little player. All right, let's get to it. Let's get right to it. Georgia wins a national title last year. They beat Alabama in the finals. You know, Alabama beats them in the SEC championship game, and then Georgia avenges the loss in the Final Four. Let's start with Georgia. You know, they go 14-1 last year. The 8th year wonder Stetson Bennett is back for another year in Athens. Seems like he's been there forever. Give the guy credit. The guy has always been they've always been trying to find a replacement for him. And last year he played really well. He got his opportunity. He played well. He's back for another year. The defense last year only gives up 66 points in SEC play, which is amazing. Basically eight SEC games, gives up 66 points. Just give me your quick thought on Georgia. They're loaded again this year on defense. Offense is back intact. They lose a couple skill guys, but a lot of offense back in Athens.
Yeah, and look, they're going to be just fine. Stetson Bennett, we talked to him at media days, and he's got his chip on his shoulder, and he knows that there's 4- and 5-star guys behind him. He still doesn't get the all-SEC accolades because he doesn't have those prototypical measurables that the NFL wants. But look, he's a winner. He showed that last year, and they still have a ton of really good running backs, really good offensive line. You know, their receivers, tight
ends. They might have the best tight ends in the country.
Absolutely. That group of tight ends with
Bowers and
Washington and Gilbert, absolutely. So there's plenty there for them to be successful. A bunch of 4- and 5-star running backs. The next ones on and on. They're always really good. So they'll be still very dynamic on offense. And then defensively, they still have one of the better defenders in the country in Jalen Carter, who might have been the number 1 pick had he come out, not his former teammate in Travon Walker, and he might be next year. Nolan Smith. I mean, they've got some Keely Ringo in the secondary. They still have a ton of talent. And the way they do it there is like they did at Alabama, where guys will play roles, lesser roles as those 4 and 5-star backups. And then when it's time to have their role elevated, they're ready to go. They have experience. They've been getting after the passer or playing different roles. So, and these are highly rated guys. They're stacking 4 and 5-star guys that maybe aren't household names yet, but they will be. They won't be last year's defense, but they're still probably the best defense in the SEC, good enough to bring them back to Atlanta in that championship game. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
And they got a great schedule too. They avoid Alabama, they avoid Texas A&M, they avoid LSU.
Yeah.
I mean, Oregon's they're maybe, you know, they got an out of conference game. They start the season again against Oregon in Atlanta, so it'll be a de facto home game.
Right.
Though the Oregon coach is the former DC Dan Lanning, so that a little bit of that there, but they're definitely going to probably overwhelm Oregon, you know, with their athletes and all that in Atlanta. So they've got a cruise control to the SEC title game in Atlanta. So we won't spend a lot of time on them because they've got a great schedule, not a lot of landmines. Your Volunteers go to Athens, or no, they host Georgia October 29th. You never know where Tennessee might be. That could be a game where they potentially could be a little bit on an upset alert.
Well, no, Tennessee is at Georgia this year. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I read that wrong.
No, it's all right. And Roman Harper from the SEC Network, we'll get to Tennessee in a second, but he picked Tennessee to go 10-2 and beat Georgia.
Wow.
So now I don't think that he meant that Tennessee was going to win the East. I just think that's probably he's saying that's Georgia's one loss in the regular season, and then Tennessee has 2. Therefore, even though Tennessee won the head-to-head, Georgia would still win the East. And his thinking, I think, part of it is that 2 things. One, Tennessee gave both Alabama and Georgia maybe their best test during the regular season.
Right.
And then all those games were into the second half close. And then Texas A&M, who you could maybe make a comparison last year's A&M to this year's Tennessee. They beat Alabama. Alabama was in the championship game. Why can't a team like that, Tennessee, be one of the big dogs, no pun intended, in Georgia? So I think more fans are kind of buying into that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. A road win even is even harder to think about. Yeah. But not everyone's looking at that as a surefire W for the Bulldogs.
All right, let's go straight to where you're at in Knoxville. Heupel, year 2, 7-6 last year. You know, they found a quarterback in Hendon Hooker. That was their bugaboo. Defensively, there's still kind of a question mark there. They had 5 games last year where they gave up 40 plus points defensively. Give us the breakdown of what you see in Tennessee. You've been at you cover all the practices, all the press conferences. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I've been every single one of them. Today was the first press conference that I wasn't at. I was doing TV, but still, Josh Heupel recapping the second scrimmage. For all these colleges, the second scrimmages are really important because guys that had a good first scrimmage, they need to show that it's not just an up and down, that they're consistent, that they can follow that up. A couple of wide receivers trying to establish themselves and replace Velus Jones Jr., who was a high draft pick of the Chicago Bears, Javonte Payton, who's in the Cardinals camp, and Cedric Tillman, the leading returning receiver in the Southeastern Conference, 1,000-yard receiver, over 60 catches. He's going to get more attention this year. So they are still trying to establish who the 2 through 5 is in the wide receiver group. Yep. Wide receivers haven't dropped as many passes as they did going into last year. Had a few in the last scrimmage. So it sounds like, from according to Heupel, that they had a better day today. Brew McCoy is a USC commit, a former 5-star. He's had a good camp, and he didn't participate in the first scrimmage, but he's out there. Still not technically eligible, but he's got size, he's got skill, a lot of things that, as the coaches have said, you can't teach. They're going to give him the waiver to be eligible. I just think it's a matter of time. It might even be – it doesn't sound like it's an NCAA thing. It just sounds like USC may be taking their time to do their administrative stuff. But he's another guy that could be in the mix for that, 2, 3, 4 spot. Jalen Hyatt, a junior, a lot of skill, lost his confidence last year. He's probably going to end up being their number 2 in terms of wide receiver. They have a left tackle position opening right now where 2 guys – Florida transfer Gerald Mincy, and former JUCO transfer Jeremiah J.J. Crawford. Those two guys are competing at left tackle. Last year's left tackle, Darnell Wright, has moved to right tackle where he's a little bit more comfortable. So that's a little unsettling, and there's really been no separation between the two. That's probably going to go into the season. Whoever plays better in games will stick there, or they'll keep platooning, which I don't think is the best way to go. But if there's no separation, that's probably where they need to go. Running back, they had lost one of their backup running backs in camp, and in Laneith Whitehead, who was supposed to be maybe their power short yardage back. So they brought in and signed Lynn J. Dixon. He was a former high recruit from Clemson who had gone to West Virginia for a cup of coffee in the spring. And then he left there. I don't know why he left there, but now he's here and in the running back room, a couple of talented freshmen in that group. Jabari Small is, I think, is primed for an even better year this year. So they got a good group of running backs. And then,
let's talk defense. Let's go defense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the key for this team. Hendon Hooker and that offense, they're going to put up big numbers. And the question is that can they avoid being what they were in the Music City Bowl in Nashville against Purdue, where they didn't have Alontae Taylor, who was healing up for the NFL draft process, and they had a whole bunch of busts in the secondary and really looked pretty bad. They can't be that if they expect to have a better year. I think they will be better for a couple of reasons. One is the pass rush. You have Byron Young, who missed the early part of last season. He was still maturing, trying to figure things out. Looks like a different guy. He's probably going to be a double-digit sack guy. They desperately need more of a pass rush. Tyler Banner's got an NFL body. He's now at the strong side defensive end spot. He finally was reached by his D-line coach and Rodney Garner. He looks great in camp too, and everyone's raving about how the kind of season he can have as well. And then Jeremy Banks, one of the leading returning tacklers at linebacker, he looks even better this year, and everybody's praising him. He's got to get better in pass coverage. We'll see if that translates in the games. And then they get Juwan Mitchell, a former Texas transfer. He missed most of last year. He's back. He might start with Banks, and that improves their linebacking core. The biggest question on defense, Jason, is the corners. They have two veteran safeties. Who are the corners and who's the star? So there's a lot of competition, a ton of bodies. They have 16 scholarship DBs. So they've got to get better on that side of the ball and at least be improved. I think with the pass rush, creating turnovers, I think that can help them in maybe masking the secondary a little bit so they develop guys. But I think this will be a little bit better defense, which means an 8 or 9 win type of season. They just can't be awful on defense. With that offense, they'll still be very good.
Are they a 4-3? Are they a 4-3 blitzing team? Are they a more of a zone team? What do they like to do on defense?
Well, they're
ideally.
I honestly, they're more of a 4-2-5. That's what we see them more in.
All right.
And look, sometimes that fourth D lineman is a stand-up stack linebacker rush edge. They call it a Leo, which is what Alabama and some of those teams do.
Yeah.
But in pass rush situation, they'll put 4 traditional guys. Some of those outside backers will put their hand down, and they have 4 guys hand in the dirt coming after you. They also, Tim Banks blitzed a lot last year, but he had more of a veteran secondary. Theo Jackson and Alontae Taylor, 2 draft picks.
Yeah.
So he may not trust them to do that to leave them out on the island as much on the back end. So that front 4 has got to be better at creating pressure on their own, so Banks doesn't have to blitz and expose his guys on the back end quite as much. That balance is going to be interesting to follow, but I think enough guys have improved to where they can do that and help that defense.
All right, let's head to Gainesville. One of the 2 coaching changes in the league. Billy Napier comes over from Louisiana, known as an expert recruiter, a protege under Nick Saban, was a position coach for Saban, did a great job at Louisiana. The Dan Mullen era kind of cratered there the last year or so, and that just really culminated in a terrible ending last year with all the not spending a lot of time on recruiting and all those rumors that came out of there. Anthony Richardson, what do you think? You think he's legit? It's weird. He only started 1 game last year, didn't play against Georgia of all teams. They threw him out there at Georgia. He's clearly the guy this year to me, this is the transition year for Florida. You're going to see what Napier can do with Richardson recruiting wise. Depth probably is going to be an issue at Florida because of the lack of recruiting by Mullen. Just your quick thoughts in Gainesville.
Yeah, I think to me, Anthony Richardson, although I'm not 100% sure what we're going to see from him, he's actually not very high on my list of concerns for Florida. All the penalties that they had last year, I want to say 79 of their penalties were self-inflicted, and they had like 2 false starts per game, something on average. I mean, just a lot of that kind of stuff. So they got to clean up the penalties. As a first-year coaching staff, are they able to fix some of those discipline things? They're not very deep.
Right.
And then look, they only got 13 takeaways last year on defense.
Right.
So they weren't helping. Typically, Florida has as stout a defense as there is in the league. So, the corner, Jaden Hill, hasn't practiced yet. They expected a lot from him. Been a little bit banged up when they have it. They're not a really super deep team. If Anthony Richardson is an absolute Superman game changer, he can probably mask some things for them on offense.
Sure.
But gosh, there's just, I worry about other guys around him letting him down and not being good enough. And then just having to flush out some issues that you had before. They're a really hard team to pinpoint. I have them behind Tennessee and Kentucky in the East.
Yeah, they have a big game to start out in Gainesville. Utah comes to town week 1. That's a kind of game you could potentially see a potential upset, maybe because of the heat, because of first game excitement and all that. But if they don't win that game, and then they go next week, the week after Kentucky comes to town, they got Tennessee in week 4 in Knoxville. That's a game again. You'll know that's a huge game in that rivalry. But yeah, I definitely see a 7-5 at best kind of year out of Florida.
Yeah, don't forget my alma mater, USF Bulls, baby. The week before the Tennessee Volunteers.
That's right.
Right. And look, that Florida game for Tennessee, that game is the difference right now, the way I'm looking at it, between an 8-win season for Tennessee and a 9-win season.
Yep. And also, to me, the Pitt game is a critical one for Tennessee as well. Get revenge for last year on the road. I think you would prove a lot of things to a lot of people if you go to Pitt and win that game in week 2.
Absolutely. And look, there's plenty of people that are assuming that Tennessee win because they lost Jordan Addison. They lost Kenny Pickett.
Yep.
They still have Baldonado, who's a potential first-round draft pick at defensive end. Couple sacks against Tennessee. It's not an easy place to play. Narduzzi always has him play in D. So that's a little trickier than on paper, I think, the way Tennessee fans look at it. But Florida, even much worse teams than this Florida team, have beaten Tennessee teams that were better than Florida that year overall, and Florida still found a way to win. So that's one of those, hey, you might need to show me before I can go there, because we've seen guys that aren't even quarterbacks play quarterback, or not very good ones, and lead Florida to some ugly win over Tennessee. This is a little different Tennessee team, I get it, but that's one that's going to be maybe the difference between 8 and 9 wins. Even if
you're Tennessee, if you're going to make the jump at Tennessee, you got to win that game at home.
Yes.
That's a game you got to win. If you're going to elevate the program from the 7-5, 8-4 to a 9 or 10 win, that's the game for absolutely you have to win that game.
Yeah, because after that, then you get a bye week at LSU and then Alabama.
Then Kentucky and Georgia 2 or 3 weeks after that. So the middle of that schedule gets rough. All right, let's go to South Carolina. Shane Beamer, year 2, the huge recruit transfer. You got Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma in there. First time they've had a really good quarterback, theoretically. I know Rattler struggled a little bit and got beat out, but the name and the recruit-wise, that's a big name to get at South Carolina at quarterback. Defense was pretty good last year at South Carolina. They somehow won 7 games with the disastrous quarterback play they had. Do you think Rattler can be that much of a difference maker for South Carolina?
I do, and I don't think they're contending in the East. I don't think they're quite Tennessee or Kentucky, but I have them ahead of Florida.
Yep.
And so I think they're going to be a problem. Shane Beamer has found a way to reach those kids. I mean, they love playing for him.
Yep.
Got a pretty good staff there. They're underrated defensively.
Yep.
They get some guys back from injury. They were banged up last year. They got a pretty nice group of running backs. Austin Stogner, another transfer from Oklahoma, doesn't get talked about enough. That guy is a beast and probably a future NFL tight end. So it's more than just Spencer Rattler. And I think he's going to be better there. I don't know if he's going to be, what he peaked at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But man, considering they had 4 quarterbacks and it was such a carousel there last year, it'll be definitely an upgrade. And I think the South Carolina team is going to have some moments this year. I'd like the direction they're going with Beamer.
And they got 3 of their big games at home. Georgia in week 3, A&M comes to town, and Tennessee. Your guys come to town late in the year. So if that crowd, that place is a raucous crowd, they'll get into it if they're playing well. Those will be 3 tough games for those 3 teams to go in there and get a win.
Underrated crowd when they're playing Sandstorm, and you got the Rooster, they're playing Ric Flair, Woo, and all that kind of stuff. It's a good atmosphere.
No doubt. All right, we'll do a quick Vandy, Missouri. Vandy, obviously not a lot of expectations there. They are what they are. They try hard. The recruiting's been better with Clark Lee, but Vandy's going to struggle if they win 2 to 3 games at best. It'll be a good year. Quick thought on Vanderbilt.
Yeah, it's got to come in non-conference. I mean, but even last year they had they just inexplicable loss to ETSU.
Right.
So you can't even take those games for granted. They have Northern Illinois on the road. Somehow they're going to Northern Illinois and then Elon, and then they have the extra game against Hawaii, Wake Forest, who may not have Sam Hartman, but look, I don't think they win an SEC game, to be honest with you. If they're going to win a game or 2, it's going to be in non-conference. Missouri will be a little bit better. They won't be Vanderbilt. They'll get some of their non-conference games that they've got, but I don't expect a ton from them in SEC play. They'll be between the Florida, South Carolina group and Vandy, somewhere in between there.
I got you. All right, let's head to Kentucky to wrap up the East. Stoops has gotten into a little hissy fit with John Calipari in the last few days about all, basketball school, not a basketball school, all that. Say what you want about Mark Stoops. That guy gets the most out of most of his players most years. If their team's capable of winning 7 or 8, he usually wins what they're capable of winning. And he's gotten recruiting's gotten better. The facilities have gotten better there. They've got good players. They lost some linemen to the NFL. He's putting out NFL players. Stoops does a good job. He's been there a while, built in a culture. Your thoughts in Lexington?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And look, they have an NFL quarterback in Will Levis.
Yes.
And Will Levis did something really smart, Jason. I don't know if you had heard about this or not, but I talked to a scout that said that Will Levis threw at Kentucky's pro day.
Oh.
And, they had Wandale Robinson, the receiver there. And that was a rule that they changed to where current quarterbacks could throw to receivers. Smart for everybody, right? Robinson gets a quarterback who he's familiar with, that's chemistry with, throwing to him, so he looks good. And then he gets to throw in front of NFL scouts.
Absolutely.
And he made a big impression with them there. I don't know how many other starters did that.
Right.
But man, that is a really smart move. And they knew about him before, but that validated him for the NFL. You'll find him on some first round mocks. I think a lot of people were hesitant to go there because he didn't put up big numbers, but he's a guy with his size and running ability and arm strength that they're expecting more of this year. They got another transfer receiver. So they'll be good at the line of scrimmage. They'll be great against some of their weaker competition on defense and then give up a bunch of points in some of their tougher games, Tennessee and some others. But Stoops gets the most out of that team. I was a little bit surprised that the media picked Kentucky ahead of Tennessee in the East. It was very close, but Kentucky's in top 25 rankings in most of them, and Tennessee is not.
Yeah.
Tennessee's just on the outside looking in. So I think Mark Stoops has proven himself, and people buy in. And the whole thing with Calipari, to me, I don't think that impacts them much during the year. It's interesting, but I don't think it impacts them too much. They'll be right there with Tennessee as the 2 and the 3 in the East.
10-3 last year in Kentucky. I mean, if 10 years ago we'd have thought Kentucky would be a legit football school, we'd have been crazy as well as he's done there.
Hey, Jason, let me say this. I don't care how many games Kentucky wins. Tennessee fans does not register to them that they will lose to Kentucky. I mean, there's the history there. So, I mean, that's part of it. I get it. But they can't, it's the name of the school versus the name of the school.
Yep.
I don't care what Kentucky brings to the table. Tennessee should not lose to Kentucky in the minds of Tennessee fans. I have Tennessee winning that game too. It is in Knoxville, but it's so crazy. Tennessee fans haven't been influenced by their recent success.
All right, listen to the Powers on Sports podcast. We're on with Vince Ferrara, 99.1 Knoxville, giving you a full SEC preview. Let's head to the West. Again, we don't want to spend a lot of time in Alabama. We know they're loaded.
Yeah.
Lost in the national title game last year to Georgia. You got Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young. You got a lot of people think the best player in the country in Will Anderson.
Yeah.
The defense is supposed to be loaded this year, kind of vintage Alabama defense. 2 question marks. They got a good transfer kid from Georgia Tech to play running back, who they think he's pretty dynamic. And then the offensive line. If the offensive line can get back into form, and they got to find a couple receivers. They lost another batch of receivers to the NFL. They got the kid Burton from Georgia transferred in.
Yep.
So just any concerns with Alabama?
No, I mean, you mentioned the offensive line. They really were never great on the offensive line last year. Not as good as some other Alabama teams have been. So that's still a question mark. I mean, I watched their spring game, and there are still plenty of unknowns at that point on that offensive line. So, but typically they're so good in so many other areas, they can make up for it. And then later in the year, they kind of get things going and figure it out. So
they go. They go to Texas in week 2, the Sark Bowl. They get the reunion with Sark in Austin. Should win that game, but again, with Sark knowing that program so well, wouldn't be surprised if that game's closer than people think. And then in the middle of the year, October 1, 8, and 15, go to Arkansas, host A&M, and then go to Knoxville. That's their little 3-game gauntlet. If Alabama's going to stumble, that's probably where it's going to happen.
Yeah, let me tell you this. I'll say right now, I don't know what the spread is going to be in that game with A&M in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's going to put a beat down on the Aggies. I mean, after what happened last year, they always revenge people that do that. Arkansas should be a challenge on paper. It is on the road. But man, Arkansas has had a tough time matching up with Alabama in the past. It's kind of a reality check game. I think Tennessee, even though Alabama has the streak, I think Tennessee is going to be their most challenging game because of the way they play offense.
I agree. All right, let's head to Auburn. All right, Harsin, all the coaching issues over the offseason. Calzada comes in as the quarterback from Texas A&M. They start off with 5 straight home games. Is this a year they can win 7 or 8 games, or do you still see them kind of a 6-6 building program?
No, I actually picked them last in the West.
Okay.
So I don't remember what the media might have picked them 6, something like that, maybe 7. But TJ Finley just got arrested. He gets a big NIL deal and he gets arrested.
Yep.
I don't think he was going to win that job anyway as a starting quarterback. So yeah, I think it's going to be Calzada. Just to me, they're not good enough for the offensive line. Great running back and Tank Big G. Just some holes and not deep enough. And I don't think the Brian Harsin era is going to go beyond this year. I just think it's a different setup than what he's used to.
All right, let's head to the Magnolia State. Hit the 2 Mississippi schools, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Ole Miss, Kiffin had a great year last year. With Corral's gone on to the NFL. You got Ole Miss at 10-3. They lose both coordinators. The defense has been atrocious for years, but they do bring in Jackson Dart from USC, who will probably win that job. They lose 20 starters. Seems like a rebuilding year, even though Lane will probably outscore a couple of teams that he probably shouldn't beat, will be in the game scoring-wise. But and then Mississippi State, Leach, you never know what you're going to get out of Leach. Leach is such a wild card as a coach. Usually they have good interior and defensive and offensive lines. You know, they got a third-year quarterback coming back in Will Rogers. What do you see out of Ole Miss and Mississippi State?
Yeah, I think Ole Miss is going to be dynamic. Jonathan Mingo is one of the better receivers in the league. They also landed Jalen Robinson, who was UCF, a great wide receiver from UCF that Tennessee really wanted. You pick Ole Miss over Tennessee. They got all kinds of weapons. They'll be able to run the ball. They have Zach Evans, another former Tennessee commit. The transfers over from TCU. They really worked the transfer portal.
Yep.
Lane Kiffin, so they're filling holes. The question is any of those guys make an impact on defense? That's what they really need the most. And like Tennessee, they just can't be awful. They just have to be at least a little bit more respectable. And they were for some parts of last year.
Yep.
I think Ole Miss is going to be good, top 25 type of team.
Okay.
A zillion and 3 points. Mississippi State probably outperformed my expectations last year. Still a great quarterback, and Will Rogers put up amazing points. And they're not going to have the name value. They probably had the most inauspicious trio at SEC football media days in terms of name guys that were there. But Leach got a lot out of them last year, so they'll win some games. I think they're middle of the pack, maybe a little bit on the bottom half of the SEC West.
Yeah, they got a rough middle of the schedule. Texas A&M, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Alabama, 4 in a row. They're in like week 5 through 8. So tough go. And they got Georgia at the end of the year. So again, 7-5 kind of year for Mississippi State would be a good year.
Right.
Let's head to Arkansas. Sam Pittman, KJ Jefferson. I was at the Outback Bowl last year when Pittman and Jefferson played really well. They led the league in rushing last year. That's kind of their calling card. Big guys. Pittman's an offensive line coach is in his prior coaching days. KJ Jefferson's got to improve the passing game. Burks onto the NFL, the big-time receiver, was a first-round draft pick for your Tennessee Titans there in Nashville.
Yeah.
Can Arkansas repeat the up-and-coming program? They had a lot of super seniors last year as well. A lot of those 5th and 6th year kids stayed. So what do you see out of Arkansas?
I think Arkansas is going to be really good again, and I think they're going to be a problem. They have a lot of really good qualities. They're good at the line of scrimmage, and they've got a top-tier quarterback. Yeah, he's not perfect. He has things he needs to improve on, but, man, he still had plenty of games where he was slinging it from the pocket and wasn't relying on running the ball, even though he's a hoss when he does run it. And right there with Hendon Hooker as the second or third best quarterback in this league.
Yep.
They'll be able to run the ball again this year. Raheem Sanders and Dominic Johnson, who hasn't participated in camp, he's been dinged up. So they don't know if he's going to be back for week 1, but they'll be able to run the ball. You get the running game from the quarterback there as well. I think they still have some good defenders on that team, including Bumper Pool, great name, who was at Media Days. So, yeah, they had some losses, but I still think they're going to be very good. They're not challenging the West good, but I think they're right there with LSU and Texas A&M for second, third, fourth. I think Pittman, again, gets the most out of as much as anybody out of the roster he has.
All right, let's go to Texas A&M. Jimbo, October 8th, going to Alabama with all the offseason stuff with he and Saban. Quarterback questions. You got Max Johnson transferring from LSU to A&M, son of Brad Johnson. Shout out to my boy Brad. Competing. Is he going to win the job? Is it going to be the incoming freshman, the freshman from last year? So the quarterback mix is going to be interesting. They lost a lot of skill guys, running back, tight end, receivers. We keep waiting for A&M to make the big jump. Is this the year?
I don't think so. I think they'll be very good, Jason, but I don't think they're a college football playoff or
I don't either.
Top 6 in the country type of team.
Yep.
I think that's a little lofty for them. And yes, they beat Alabama last year, but I like I mentioned before, I think that gets evened out this year. And although they have some talented guys competing at that quarterback spot, Haynes King, the other guy, the Tennessee wanted, Max Johnson, Connor Wegman, their highest rated, like you mentioned, at quarterback. I would probably Haynes King, but still, they can. A-Chain is a good running back. They've had some disturbing things. They had a receiver arrested just before media days. They had they had a change in guys, coaches switching positions during camp, in what they coach.
Yeah,
that's those kind of things are a little concerning for me. They were great defensively last year, especially stopping the run. So they got some of those guys back, but I think the expectations are too high for this A&M team, but they'll still be a very good team, probably in that 9-ish, maybe even 10 win range.